afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to our debate this evening. That is, this House would ban all forms of animal research. It's great to see so many people turning up to our events every week, and please help yourself to free wine at the back of the room. A few announcements before we start. The first is that you can now join our society, both if you're a fresher or a non-fresher. To do that, please go to uclu.org/shop and purchase a membership. It's £8, which is quite a lot because we can give you all this free wine on Monday nights. And we also, if you want to go to competitions, we do fund your registration fee. But it's a great way to get involved and a great way to keep our society moving and putting on all these great events each week. Training sessions this week, we have our beginners workshop, which will take place in the Darwin Lecture Theatre, which is B40. If you are confused as to where that is, you can meet our Director of Debates and Volunteers outside the Science Library at 6:45 p.m, and then we'll take you to the room. This Thursday is 7 p.m. in Mallet Place in room 103. So if you are confused, you can meet them at 6:45 in the Mallet Place foyer, and they will also take you to the room. This week we ran the President's Cup, our annual novice competition. It was very, very successful, and we actually had a UCL team in the final, so congratulations to Alex and Catherine for getting all the way to the final. It was a really fierce competition, and they should be really, really proud. Also, a big thank you to Sherry and Aaron, our excellent conveners, who put on a really, really great competition, and thank you to all our other speakers and volunteers who came down on the day. We really appreciated all your participation and support. Just a couple of also announcements. The EGM, the Emergency General Meeting, will be happening on the 11th of November, which is a Monday, so instead of a Monday night debate, we'll be having our EGM. You can only take part in the EGM either running or voting if you are a member, so if you are interested in doing that, please do join up. We have put 4 positions available on the committee: our schools chair, our first year representative, a technology officer, which is to deal with like the website and getting things filmed, and also our director of debates, which is basically our training officers. If you're interested in applying for any of those roles, running for any of those roles, I should say, please talk to either me, myself, or any of the committee members who are here this evening. We'd be happy to give you some more information. The other thing we're also running is our World University Debate Championships trials. So every year there is a World University Debating Championships. This year it is in Chennai in India. We have one team spot for that, and they're going to take place on the 24th of October. Sorry, I realised in the email it said the 31st, but we had to change the date. If you're interested, please email the society or contact us on Facebook and send us your email and CV, and hopefully we will be able to put you down for the trials. So I'm now we'll talk about the format of the debate in a second, but first I'd like to introduce Alex Carell. He's from IDEA, and he's just going to speak to you very, very briefly.
Okay, so today's public debate at UCL is going to be a little bit special. It's part of a series of more than 30 public debates that are going to be taking place across the country. There are more running today, in fact. There's one running at KCL, one running at the University of Hull, one running at the University of Sheffield, and they're all on the same motion. This House would ban all forms of animal research. This is part of a programme called the Big Animal Research Debate, where my organisation, IDEA, the International Debate Education Association, aims to try and harness the passion and the discursive skill, the ability to speak clearly in public, to explain complicated ideas in an accessible way, to try and define and explore what is a significant public controversy. This is the first time we've tried anything like this, and given that this is the very first debate of the series, and also the first that we're streaming live, I'm absolutely bowled over at the turnout. Emily, in a moment, is going to explain the format that UCL is going to be using, and also introducing the guest speakers. But the one thing I would hasten to point out here is that what IDEA specialises in is pairing up student debaters, people like you and people like the students we have on the panel, with individual experts, with guest speakers who have a unique insight into the problems that they're discussing. So what you're going to be seeing here is each of our guest speakers paired up with a student debater, one of whom is from UCL, one of whom is a well-known international debater. And this is part of the way in which we kind of forward understanding and deepen the understanding of the subjects that we handle through these public debates. So before we move on, I'd like to thank you all very much for coming here and for your participation.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, so the format of the debate for this evening, speeches will be 7 minutes in length, with 1 minute protected time on each end of the speech. Once you hear a sound like this, it means protected time is over, and the audience will be able to ask points of information. Points of information is when you want to ask the speaker a question about something that they're saying. They should really be kept to about 10 seconds in length, as they do eat into the speaker's time and speech time. After we have 4 rounds of this, we'll then go to floor speeches. Floor speeches are supposed to be 3 minutes in length, and they are for you guys from the audience to come up and speak to either in proposition, opposition, or abstention of the motion. You will have 30 seconds of protected time on either side of those 3 minutes in order for you guys to be able to properly participate fully in the debate experience. After the rounds of floor speech, we'll have 5 minutes of summary speeches for each of the proposition opposition team, in which no points of information may be made during that time. After the debate is over, we'll be heading to bar at TCR for our weekly debate social. Please feel free to join us, where you can talk to either members of the committee, each other, or the speakers this evening. So now to introduce the speakers for the event. In proposition, firstly, we have Dr. André Menache. Dr. Menache is a zoologist and a veterinary surgeon and CEO of Antidote Europe. He is a member of the Belgian Deontological Committee on Animal Research and an advisor for Voice for Ethical Research at Oxford, a university-based group founded in 2006 to oppose the use of animals in medical research at Oxford. He is a recipient of the 21st Century Award for Achievement from the International Biographical Centre. The next speaker in proposition we have is Helen Chandler. Helen is a second-year ESPS student at UCL and on the UCL Youth Conservative Society Committee and also the debating committee. So we welcome them here this evening. Our speakers in opposition this evening include Wendy Jarrett. Wendy has been working in health and science communications for over 20 years. Since November 2012, she has been the chief executive of Understanding Animal Research, which aims to explain why and how animals are used in medical, scientific, and veterinary research. Formerly, Wendy was Associate Director of External Communications at the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. During this time, she launched the People's Petition in support of animal research. Next, we have David Jones. David is currently a manager for a financial modelling team at KPMG. He holds a postgraduate degree in global studies from UCL and a BA in history and politics from Aberystwyth University. David is an ex-Liberal Democrat campaign coordinator, and he's a finalist in 32 intervarsity debating competitions and winner of 3, and a European University Debating Championships quarter-finalist and international MACE finalist. We welcome them here this evening. So after that warm welcome, I would like to invite the first speaker for the proposition, Dr. Menache, to open the case for the proposition. Here.
Okay. Good evening. I'm used to debating where I can compress 30 years of my campaigning experience in 10 minutes. I've never done it in 7 minutes, but I'm going to try tonight. We live in an age of evidence-based medicine. Those of you familiar with concepts like evolutionary biology, complexity science, gene ontology, the history of medicine, will realize straight away that animal experimentation is not evidence-based. I, as a veterinary surgeon, will not test a drug for parrots on horses. So why test a drug for people on rats? Okay, that's not evidence-based. We have a very nice example in the cosmetics industry with the product Botox, which I hope none of you have used yet. Botox is the most potent substance, toxic substance known to science, okay? It's used, as you know, for cosmetic, but also for medical purposes. Now, the industry and animal researchers said you could never avoid animal testing to put Botox on the market. And yet, 10 years of campaigning by the Humane Society of the United States has managed to force industry to come up with a completely non-animal testing method for Botox. So if they can do it for the most potent toxic substance in the world, then surely they can do it for pharmaceutical drugs, which are way less toxic than that. So we have a nice example in the cosmetics industry. The reason we have such a nice example in the cosmetics industry is because the general public get the message that it's not right that animals should die so we can put stuff on our face. Okay, but the same non-animal testing methods that have been developed as a result of public opinion, that have been developed to replace animal testing, those same 11 categories of toxicity testing can be applied to industrial chemicals, can be applied to pharmaceutical drugs. It's all a question of public opinion. The reason the pharmaceutical industry still tests drugs on animals today is because of a 65-year-old law that requires it. Okay, but pharmaceutical industry knows full well that if you can come up with a human-based, non-animal testing method, they will actually put your dossier on top of the others. Okay, so what they're saying, what the regulators are saying to the pharmaceutical industry is, hey, if you want to get your product onto the market, you must test it on animals because that's a regulatory requirement. But if you provide us with pharmacogenomic data based on human cell studies, we will actually give you an advantage. We will put your dossier on top of the others. So the pharmaceutical industry is heading in the right direction. The chemicals, the cosmetics industry is heading in the right direction. The big problem today, as I see it, is the chemicals industry. They do not want to let go of the rat model. They are allowed today to choose between 250 different strains of rat or 330 different strains of mouse to prove that their product is safe or not safe. So you pay me in the right pocket, and I will prove to you that this bottle of wine is safe. And you pay me in the other pocket, I will find a strain of rat or mouse to prove exactly the opposite. I know of no other industry where the industrials are allowed to prove that their product is safe or not safe. I think one of the reasons that you and I have about 300 industrial chemicals in our bodies that shouldn't be there is blood. You would say, yes, superficially, it looks just, it sounds like it resembles our heart. But I can tell you that dogs' heart have a far better collateral blood supply than a human heart. And dogs don't die of heart attacks, they die of heart failure. Okay, we die of heart attacks. Another thing that you cannot tell by looking at a dog heart is that there are differences between the way men's hearts and women's hearts function. Okay, I'm not talking about falling in love. Okay, there are certain heart drugs out there that are 4 times more potent in women than in men. Many women have died because heart drugs were tested on healthy young white men between the ages of 25 and 35, average height and weight, non-smokers. Okay, and that's what the pharmaceutical industry likes to do. So they get the animal testing done, get it over with because it has to be done, and then they test on human healthy volunteers. And that's where they get the real data. And once they've tested on healthy human volunteers, they quickly go back to the lab and they compare the results to the animal data. And if it doesn't fit, they're allowed to swap and change a different animal species. You can swap a rat and a mouse, you can swap a monkey with a dog. Okay, Vioxx, the mother of all drug tragedies, which killed about 150,000 to 200,000 people worldwide, strokes and heart attacks, the lawyers who represented Merck, the manufacturer of Vioxx in court, said that the drug was actually cardioprotective in mice. It protected the hearts of mice. Okay, so, with animals, you can prove what the heck you like. Animal testing, ladies and gentlemen, is not evidence-based. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Dr. Menache for that fine speech and call on Ms. Jarrett to continue the case for the opposition today. Hear, hear.
Can I first just say I didn't launch the people's petition when I was at NICE. Let's just make that clear because they won't like that. I did lots of other things, but not that. Okay, great. Thank you. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me here this evening. This is a very strongly worded motion. We have to be clear about what we're talking about. We're talking about banning all forms of animal research. And if you vote for this motion today, that's what we'll have to do tomorrow. We're talking about a complete ban of a system of science that has served us very well for hundreds of years. And if we decide whether we want to ban it or not, we need to understand exactly what it is that we're banning and what the implications of banning it would be. So firstly, let's look at what animal research isn't, because I think that's quite important to be able to actually say what it is we're talking about here. It isn't undertaken lightly, and it's not an easy option. There isn't a scientist in the UK who can wake up one morning and say, I think I'll open up a guinea pig today. Each piece of research needs 3 separate licenses from the Home Office. The scientist has to show that research couldn't be carried out using a non-animal alternative. They also have to show that the expected benefit of the research outweighs the harm that will be caused to the animal. It has to go through an ethical review process. Animal research isn't the default position. Researchers do use alternatives like computer screening, cell cultures, sophisticated 3D models, before and after they use animals. But at some point, the scientist needs to see what happens to that compound in a whole living, breathing organism.
Wendy, so if an alien species were to come to Earth, superhuman more intelligent than ourselves, would you be in favour of them using us as objects of research?
I don't think that's a question that we can cover today. Certainly not in my 7 minutes. But perhaps we'll talk about it in the bar afterwards. If they do use an animal, if an animal is used, it's because there is no non-animal alternative available for that stage of the process. It's illegal to use an animal if an alternative exists, and the Home Office will not grant a licence until it's convinced that there's no other way to do that experiment. Animal research isn't about testing cosmetics. This has been banned in the UK since 1998. You can't test Botox in the UK for cosmetic purposes, mainly because it isn't licensed for cosmetic purposes in the UK, it's only licensed for medical reasons. It isn't about smoking beagles. Research on tobacco products has been banned since 1997 in this country. What animal research is predominantly mice, 74%, with fish, rats and birds taking that up to 97%. In 2012, just over 4 million animals were used in the UK. Sounds like a large number? It is a large number. But it equates to 4 mice, just less than 1 fish and 1 rat being used on your behalf for all your medical needs over your entire lifetime. Fact is that practically every medicine and treatment we have today has been developed using animal research. All our veterinary medicines have also been developed using animals. And contrary to what Andre was saying, ferrets were used to create the vaccine for canine distemper virus, rabbits were used to develop the vaccine for rabies. Very importantly, animals are used to test new medicine for safety. In 1937, a US pharmaceutical company accidentally killed over 100 people using a poisonous solvent in a medicine. This led to a legal requirement for all new medicines to be safety tested on animals before they're given to humans. And following the thalidomide tragedy in the 1960s, the law was updated so that new medicines have to be tested on pregnant animals, which they didn't have to be before then. Today, 2 species of animal have to be used, a rodent and a larger mammal. But let's think about what banning animal research would mean. How about if we'd been debating this motion 100 years ago? What would we not have today if animal research had been banned by a group of people like us here tonight at the beginning of the 20th century? Well, we wouldn't have insulin for diabetes. Banting and Best used 10 dogs in the 1920s to prove that diabetes could be controlled by using insulin injections. 8 mice were used to prove that penicillin was effective before it was given to a human being for the first time. It's since saved millions of lives. Anyone here with asthma has frogs and guinea pigs to thank for their inhalers. Animal research led to vaccines for diphtheria, tuberculosis, polio, diseases which used to kill thousands of people every year. And anyone who trots out the old canard about cancer research being about curing cancer in the mouse but not in humans, clearly not been looking at the steady improvements in survival rates for cancer over this century. We may not have cured cancer, but we are turning it into a condition that people live with rather than die from, just as we have already with diabetes and HIV. And let's not forget the fact that we now have a vaccine to prevent cervical cancer. My daughters and some of the young women in this room will benefit from that research, which involved cows, dogs and rabbits. In recent days, we've heard about a hope for a vaccine for malaria, a disease that still kills 2 people every minute in developing countries. There's also been coverage of a compound that has reversed the degeneration of brain cells in mice, offering hope for people with Alzheimer's. And that's the word I want to end with, hope. If we ban animal research on malaria and dementia, but people with cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, motor neuron disease, people with infections that are resistant to our current antibiotics. So who are we, our generation, who've benefited from all the results of animal research? Who are we with our life expectancies of 80 years or more to deny those people the chance of a cure? I, for one, do not want to live in a society that bans this vital route to medical progress. So, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to vote against this motion.
for a speech and call on Helen to continue the case for the proposition. Hear, hear.
Sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Speaker, thank you very much for welcoming me here to talk to you about this, and especially thank you so much for your acceptance of having someone who's not specifically scientific or who knows a great deal about this. So if the end is that we can cure cancer, then why not kill millions and millions of mice? That would be absolutely fine. Well, there's been little discussion of the actual principles of this argument. Why it is that we humans feel that we have some authority over another species who does often show signs of consciousness and especially definitely has the capacity to feel pleasure and pain. So I'm a philosophy student actually, and so I don't know if any of you've probably read Descartes because everyone here is fairly wealthy. So we're all, familiar with, probably all of you did Latin at school anyway, so cogito ergo sum, you know what I mean. I think, therefore I am. So that's the principle which I feel that most up to here we've been applying to this argument, because I as a human can write and discuss Shakespeare, then therefore I am a real being capable of having rights. I don't think that is largely true, and in fact, to counter nasty Frenchy Descartes, I'm going to have a quote from Jeremy Bentham, very appropriate. He said, in response, in talking about animals and whether or not they have rights, it is not important to ask, can they think? It is important to ask, can they feel? So, if we think about this in a better example, rights being whether or not you can feel pleasure or pain, not whether or not you can solve, I don't know, sigma graphs or whatever. Let's think about a human example. So, for example, imagine a very sad situation where, say, a grandmother or grandfather of yours got a horrendous degenerative disease, a disease of some sort, which means that they are steadily losing their mental facilities and their ability to think until the point where their mental capacity is no more than that of a child. Obviously a horrendous situation. But I don't think in this situation we would say it would be okay to do scientific experiments on them because they can no longer deal with literature. I don't think that is a realistic argument. I think that the reason we could still grant them rights is because they have the capacity for both pleasure and pain. When we're judging equality of rights, which I think we all believe in, right? Everyone in society has equal rights. Yeah, cool. Prisoners, bit dodgy, but okay. Let's pretend we're not British, okay? Let's pretend we're, say, European. Oh, sorry, that's the same thing. No. Let's pretend we're French. Right, that's fine. Rights are granted to people universally in French society, irrespective of their gender, their race, or their IQ. I think that's fair to say. We would all like to live in a society like that. Gender, race, and IQ are three things which are all controlled by genetics, which is pretty much the same as this animal rights argument, that the genetics of the animal are what gives them rights, and therefore their lesser speciesism means that their ability to claim rights to the protection of their own body is less. Pain receptors in the brain, oh god, I'm doing some science now, so bear with. Pain receptors in the brain are collected to form a reaction, which is done, Helen, do shout out if this is wrong, which are collected in parts of the brain that are called the medulla, thalamus, and limbic system. I just pronounced it wrong. However, all mammals have these, and I think all vertebrates, they have spines. So, therefore, shut up, we can say that there is significant reason to grant animals rights, as their pleasure and pain receptors are exactly the same as those of a human. So, can we still... Yes, thank you.
So, given that the first proposition speaker based his argument on biological differences between humans and animals,
yes.
Can you really say that animals feel pain? How many animals
Okay, so this is what I'd like to say. How many animals are there? mentally and psychologically, animals are actually more similar than we think to humans. It's just physiologically that they are wildly, wildly different, which is why testing drugs on animals always gets...
They're a lot more physiologically like us than they are mentally like us.
Okay, thank you for your question. I didn't really ask for it, but that's nice anyway. Which is why testing drugs on animals is often so ineffective. So I think we can say here that cogito ergo sum is highly refutable, and I think I've done that quite well. So animal testing is also very ineffective. In the US, per annum, 50 to 60 million animals are killed, and that's just the US. It's not taking into account all other scientific bases of the world. However, the Food and Drugs Administration, which is the body which controls the release of drugs into the market in the US, rejected 50% of drugs released in the 1990s after they were released, having been tested on animals, and yet to discover that the side effects were horrendous. So take, for example, the thalidomide disaster, where I know this was a bit before the 90s, but where 10,000 babies were born with horrendous birth defects, and another 5,000 were dead upon birth. So we can see that here, with my argument, that animal testing is morally wrong, because animals have rights. I'm sorry, Helen, you're out of time. But it is also incredibly risky to human health to base testing on animals, which are so very different. For example, also, penicillin is deadly to guinea pigs. Fact. Another fact. So, overall, animal testing is morally wrong and unjustifiable in a moral sense, and also it is very risky and ineffective, and I'm sure that there are other ways that we could do it which someone else can think of. Thank you!
I'd like to thank Helen for that speech. Just a quick reminder to our members of the audience that you have to wait to be called upon before you can give your POI, and the speaker has the right to say no thank you. And also please make sure your POIs are within the 6 minutes of unprotected time. After that, I would like to now introduce Dave Jones to continue the case for the opposition. Here.
We heard from the last speaker that penicillin is deadly to guinea pigs. What I'd also like to clarify is that chocolate gives me wicked gas, ladies and gentlemen, in the same way that it gives dogs quite serious digestive problems. But what we can do is we can give chocolate to other people who aren't as lactose intolerant as myself, and we can find out causative relationships, like eating too much chocolate makes you fat. So what we do know is that penicillin is deadly to guinea pigs. This is why we would suggest maybe testing it on other species, in the same way I would suggest testing chocolate on other people who aren't me, especially if you're standing in the near vicinity. So what are we talking about? We're talking about ultimately two different questions. One is a utilitarian basis, just this idea of what is more worthwhile, which side saves the most. And then secondly, we've got the interesting point that came from the audience, which fits in nicely with the previous speaker, about deontological ethics. Is it okay if an alien race who was far more intelligent than us came down and did this form of testing on us? So I'm going to deal with them as they came up. And I think we win this debate on several bases. I think we win this debate, firstly, on the basis of necessity. So we heard from our previous speakers that there are other alternatives, and that this is not a form of evidence-based medicine. So we're just going to ask, what is a form of evidence-based medicine, evidence-based testing? That's where you have a hypothesis, and you go with it, and you test it on something, and you see what the outcome is. Ultimately, the best form of evidence-based medicine in this scenario is finding people with that disease, giving them the drug, and seeing if it cures them or kills them. Unfortunately, what we have, ladies and gentlemen, is we have several studies several places, several cases, where these kind of situations had led to the death of humans, ladies and gentlemen. So situations such as Northwind Park, where you saw, how many? 12? Six human beings in intensive care, one of which lost his legs, several lost their lives. Or, ladies and gentlemen, you see the case with thalidomide, where inappropriate testing has led to serious birth defects. So the question comes down to this idea of, is this going to save or kill more humans? And do you think humans are on an equal comparative to animals or not? I'll take you in a second, madam. So we then get the example of Botox and forcing the pharmaceutical industry to come up with an alternative. And what we say is twofold. Firstly, we think it's reasonably simple to recreate Botox in a lab environment, such as all it does is paralyse muscles in the nerve endings so your face looks like this. You can create a synthetic version of that because we all already know the chemical components. What we're testing at the moment is cures to things like Parkinson's, cures to things like cystic fibrosis. And we think these are things we don't already know, or we have a hypothesis, and they could be helped by evidence-based medicine, by testing on things that are similar to us and seeing the results, and then coming up with a conclusion based on that. Go ahead, madam. Okay, never mind. So we say, even if it is the case that some big evil corporation like GSK could come up with an alternative, what you need to ask yourself here is, do you really think medical professionals are evil? Do you really think that the reason they do this is because they want to hurt animals, because they want to go out and cause suffering on animals? Or do you think there are other reasons? Do you think it could be slower to develop medicine through this particular method, ladies and gentlemen, because you're not using all of the points of data? You're limiting your points of data to either computer simulations, which are notoriously ineffective because we haven't even mapped out the human genome yet, ladies and gentlemen, so we can't simulate things effectively. We think they could be more expensive, and in this case it's a legitimate argument to make that it's more expensive if you take a limited section of society. And we say, well, I'll say, if it is more expensive, what that does mean is that these evil drug corporations have less money to develop new cures, ladies and gentlemen, less money to develop in alternative sources of research. So whilst he says there are alternatives, and we can force alternatives, they're slower, they're less effective, and they ultimately mean that more and more people die. So going on to the second question, this idea about rights and do we have some form of duty to animals? The previous speaker to me talked about a quote from Bentham, where we don't have to consider what a person thinks, but whether they feel pleasure or feel pain. If this case is true, and she does genuinely believe this, then what we should do in this scenario is create some form of lion police to stop lions eating gazelles, ladies and gentlemen. Because lions will eat more gazelles than they will gain happiness from, so we need to stand in the way and stop them, because that way we maximise the pleasure of animals without inflicting pain on only a small group of people. In our society, yes, we do accept that the value of and life of an animal is secondary to that of humans. That is why we don't enforce vegetarianism. That is why we don't ban leather. That is why we don't ban pesticides, which end up killing animals when that gets washed into the food stream, ladies and gentlemen. Because we say that humans are more important. Now here's where your quote becomes really interesting, your question, about if an alien came down from the Earth and was superior in intelligence to everyone else in society, could he legitimately test on us? This is where it gets interesting, because I say that the reason that rules exist, the reason that laws exist, are to modify behaviour for the betterment of everyone. So the reason I can't stab someone else is it creates a better atmosphere that other people can't stab me, and I don't have to worry about it, ladies and gentlemen. So my freedom is restricted so that others don't act in the same way, and we come out with a better conclusion. If an alien came down and wanted to test on us, I would ask that he shows that there is some form of contract in which we should have participated in, which will make a betterment for all of us, ladies and gentlemen. Because what we say is, at its highest, an animal cannot participate in this form of contract, cannot participate in the protections that human society offers, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why we place it at a lower level, because there's no guarantee that we can make that a cow won't trample me when I'm hiking, ladies and gentlemen, or a gorilla won't rip my face off. There's no contract I can make a gorilla sign to stop that, and there's no way I can ever be sure that the gorilla understands it. This is why we think we have laws to protect certain individuals over other species. And this is why we think, in this case, opposition win.
I'd like to thank Dave for that fine speech, and now it is time for floor speeches. I forgot to say at the beginning, during these floor speeches, if you give the best floor speech, you can win this bottle of port, so lot up for grabs there. So when you give your floor speech, if you could come to the front please to make your case. Is there anyone to speak in proposition of the motion this evening? Oh, we also have a box of chocolates as well. Is that great? Is there anyone to speak in proposition of the motion this evening? Yes, Tada, come down. Also, if you do come down to make a floor speech, just be aware there's some wires here, so it might be best to go around that way.
Okay, so I'd like to start by referring to something that we've just heard. So we hear this notion that humans are superior to animals because they are rational actors. They can actually choose not to follow their animalistic instincts and choose to act morally instead. But I say allowing animal research defeats its argument in itself, because if humans have this alternative, they have an alternative to rationally choose to be moral, to be different from animals, but then they go and subject an entire species to their own betterment. So, isn't that confirmation that the law of natural selection actually applies to humans as equally as it does to animals? I think that this argument is just contradictory in itself. Okay, but no, thank you. I think there's something else to be done here, because if we really wanted this motion to take place in the society, you cannot just prove, as Helen did very well, that this is immoral. You have to prove why this would be good for the society, because the society makes its own rules and will not always act on something just because it's moral. It will act on it because it's the best thing for the society, right? But I think that there is a case to be made that actually we gain more by banning animal research than we do by keeping it. Okay, so previous speaker talked about laws as well, right? But I think if you're a society and if you have your laws, you can only expect people to respect them if you respect them yourself. So, for example, I think that there is a huge problem when some societal norm tells to this boy in school, don't bully your weaker classmate, don't take away his money just because he's weaker. But then on the societal level, they do the same thing when they subject the weaker species for their own good, for their own selfish purposes, right? I think there's an inherent problem in when the society tells a homeless person not to steal a sandwich when he's hungry, because don't act like an animal. But in the same time, we also when we are all together as a society, this responsibility just vanishes. We are all of a sudden decreased to a more moral level of a wild animal when we do everything that we need just to preserve ourselves, our own species, right? I think that it's not okay to expect people to walk on this moral high ground when the society's moral is so much lower. I think that basically by imposing this motion, you would level up this. I think you would tell people that their acting morally really is what the society places the highest value at. And I think this is important because ultimately what makes your life better is not the perfect physical health of your body, it's the interactions you have with other people and it's the level of empathy in the society which determines that.
I'd like to thank Tenor for that speech. Is there anyone to speak in opposition of the motion? Yes, Madam, yeah.
Right, 3 minutes. Helen Langley.
We have some order, please.
Right, is there time for me to go?
Yes, when you're ready.
Right. Hi, I didn't know that I'd be able to do this, so I've scribbled quickly in my notebook, but never mind. Anyway, I'd like to address what Helen said earlier and what I tried to make a point of, but failed. Anyway, you've been talking a lot about us as humans and what it means to be human and all the moral and ethical judgments that we could make, but I would like to consider the position of us as animals, because really we are animals, aren't we? We are just animals with a slightly bigger brain than some other animals and with better skills at making tools for killing people and killing other animals. And the thing is, as the last speaker said, all animals will put the benefits for another species below the benefits for their own, indeed for the benefits of themselves. They don't think about their species as a whole, they just think about themselves. And so the fox will kill the chicken or something so that it can live and it can be healthy and it can be happy. And so we're talking about all these rational moral arguments and so on, but whilst we should apply them to our own society, and I'm really not saying we should all go around beheading chickens just for fun, this doesn't seem to be the most important argument here. It's, we apply these things to our own laws so that we have a happy society for ourselves. But the important thing is for ourselves, because the animal will kill you if it's going to help itself. And the other thing I wanted to say is, the first point was that the animal experimentation is not always that good. Well, a lot of things aren't always that good. The pharmacological industry, there are lots of problems with openness in drug trials, for example, but that doesn't mean that the drugs don't work and that we should ban all the drugs. What we should instead seek to do is improve it and regulate it and make things better and make sure we don't have to kill the animals and we find good ways to do it. But that doesn't mean that because some of the methods we might have are slightly problematic, we should just get rid of them. Yeah?
And, if you institute a ban, I'm supposing it's at the EU level.
Yeah.
This is supposing that the UK will still be in the EU.
You'd have to talk to Helen about that, I'm afraid.
If you institute a ban taking effect in 5, 6 or 7 years, doesn't this give the scientific or the research community enough ample time to find alternatives to animal research?
Well, it always helps to have some time, but we've been looking, like for example, I do neuroscience, we've been looking at the structure of brains for hundreds of years, and we still don't know that much yet. You know, science is never going to stop, ever, because there's always more to know. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Helen for that speech. Is there anyone to speak in abstention of the motion? I saw a hand here first, I'm afraid. Thank you.
What's your name?
Good evening, everybody. You might have to bear with me a little bit, it's been a long day, particularly as I feel that I'm essentially going to say absolutely nothing. Very much because I personally don't have a clear opinion on this topic at all. It's something I thought about from time to time. And I think it's very difficult. I think that there's arguments on both sides that I can really connect with, and they really draw me no closer. And I think that a couple of people have begun to touch on one of the things that I would mention first before I invariably get stopped for running over time. But it's that, there's a kind of argument here which is, why are we more deserving? I mean, we are, as they said, animals, just like every other organism on the planet, and we've come from the same background. Yes, we were superior in many ways. We dominated the biosphere and have now begun to alter it tremendously. In doing so, becoming very much implicit perhaps in its destruction. So we really are doing nothing for our credibility to have some specific right over animals. And then there are the arguments for, which I think Antonio Damasio, who's one of the authorities on consciousness, summed up very well when he said, pain only becomes suffering when you add consciousness. And I think we're making large steps to proving, perhaps soon empirically, that animals share many facets of consciousness with us, maybe even the autobiographical self. And I think that maybe when there's numbers added to those arguments, then they start to really gain traction, and then we have to reshape this debate. But that's kind of one side that I have kind of a problem with resolving, because I feel like we're not necessarily more deserving. So maybe in the theoretical case where if the animal isn't harmed, fantastic. Okay, so maybe if we could ensure that somehow, and that could go ahead without any problems. Okay, fine. But then there's maybe, to counter this whole thing, the arguments of desperation. I mean, similar to the arguments which are often put forward for things like GM crops, etc. I.e., in a time of desperation, approaching probably our most dangerous period in our history, should we not be taking any measure we can, even with some risks, to move forward? And that is on less steady ground here, less firm ground here, because of course there may be suffering at stake. But there are arguments that come down that route for sure. But I think that the reason I have to abstain is because, firstly, I have these issues that pull me in both directions, but also I kind of think to myself, well, the difficult thing here is not what I believe to be ethically correct, but what I think humans will do, okay? Because I think I know what humans will do, which is that if they so have the ability to choose, whether or not they think that something is ethically correct, if it's your family on the line, I think that humans are hugely corruptible. And I think that there is an innate ability for us to turn a blind eye to even our personally held ethics in the name of protecting those that we care about. So, thank you.
Is there anyone speaking proposition of the motion? Alex. Go on. Yeah. Acrobatics.
I broke the gavel. I'm just scared. I broke the gavel. Yeah. Sorry.
When you're ready.
Cool. All right. Give me a second. Okay, so some of what we've talked about today has been how far animal research is useful and how big the harm to animals is. But I think two pretty uncontroversial statements tell us what we should really be focusing on, and that is animal research is good for humans, and animal research sucks for animals. So what we have to look at is really, who do we value more? Now, that was something that Dave talked about at the end of his speech, and his answer to who we should value more and why was like a neat little contract law point. But I don't think this is really why you choose who you value more. If Dave really believed that, if he really sticks with that, I want to know why people who don't have the mental faculties due to severe disabilities should have rights. Because clearly there are people who exist who cannot consent to not attack me in the ways that Dave says, but do have the rights not to be abused in the ways that we see animals being abused. What we have to return to is what Helen talked about in her speech, which is whether people have feelings or not, whether people can feel. But not just that, but the way in which that interacts with intelligence, because that is the big major difference between animals. Because another question I want to ask is, if you see a child and an adult both in severe mortal danger, who do you instinctively go to save? And I would go to save the child. The reason I'd go to save the child is because they have less ability to help themselves, and they have less of, no thanks Dave, They have less ability to help themselves, and they have less ability to understand their situation. And these are two things that intelligence bring you. Animals don't understand the great things they did for research. We heard earlier about all the things that were achieved, but these animals who suffered and died to achieve those things understood no congratulation. They did not understand the reason for their suffering. All they understood was that they were being tortured and that they were being made to suffer. Humans, on the other hand, if we have more dangerous human testing or just people being more likely to die of diseases, sorry, there's no time, right? They can understand that they are at least achieving some greater good. They can get some benefit from this. They can have the reasons for their suffering explained to them, and that mitigates their suffering. So when humans suffer, because they can understand it, and because they can have some sort of compensation through their intelligence, they suffer less. And when the question is, who do we value more out of humans and animals? For those reasons, we have to look after the animals and not allow animal research. Thank you.
Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to the motion? Yeah.
Hi. I really enjoyed Alex's speech as he goes, animal-based research sucks for the animals, but it's good for the people. I disagree. I think it's good for the animals as well. Why is this? Maybe I should tell you a little story. Okay, my dog, I was taking him for a walk. He got ill. I took him where? To the vet! Vet, I tell you. How do the vets learn about their knowledge about animals? They test on animals. They research on animals. To harm one or two dogs' lives, to save many, I think is vastly important. Animal research is not just good for humans, but it's especially good for animals. There's a lot of occasions when a lot of animals can be wiped out of this planet because of a particular strain of virus or bacterium. If we can actually work out ways on how to prevent this from happening, find cures before it's actually hit, by taking a few animals to the side, testing them, seeing if they can actually beat it with these drugs, then when we find this cure, we can save them. It's important. Sorry, Alex. Okay. I think this is a good thing because we help animals, and not only that, we help them. We work out ways to prevent pain. For example, there's actually a sort of sedatives you can use while they're undergoing operations in the vet, which actually could be quite painful if we didn't do animal research. So, but the key thing I'm going to ask you is, right, this is what happens when animals undergo testing for research. It goes in stages. You got you got animal research, in vivo, in vitro testing, clinical trials 1, 2, and 3. But before it gets to human level, right, you have to test on animals purely because I'm pretty sure you're going to find it really hard to find a human volunteer who's going to stand up and go, I'm going to have a shot at this. It hasn't been tested on animals, but it should be fine. You're going to test it on animals because it's stupid not to, right? So you're going to test on animals, right? On a practical measure, then humans will actually undergo human testing to see if it's viable for humans. But the key thing I'm going to tell you, when it gets to the human level and it's tested on humans and the mass populace, we can actually learn from this. Testing on humans can actually help animal testing because we learn from how the humans behave with these sorts of chemicals which actually can cure cancers and stuff, and see if we can apply it to animals. So we can take this research based on humans and bring it back to the animal level. And for example, find new novel ways of curing my sick dog who's died of cancer recently. Okay. Fine. Okay, he wasn't a great dog anyway. Got 30 seconds. Okay, to sum up, animal research is good, not just for us humans, but for us the animals. We can work together to save each other's lives. So I think it's a good thing to have animal research. Thank you.
I'd like to thank John for that speech. Is there anyone who would like to speak in abstention of the motion? Daniel.
Hi. my point's not strictly relevant to this debate. It is. But I just thought we've got an audience here, and I felt a responsibility to say it, and I guess a larger audience maybe. I don't know. I just think it's very important, that we discuss animal research, and it is definitely an important debate. But I just feel there's kind of an elephant in the room, which is I just thought about what we eat. And I always think that there's a really big disconnect in society between what we have on our plate, which is really nicely presented, and we never think about what goes into it. So I just think taking something from this debate for me, when we leave, is just that we can also think about, on a daily basis, we may not interact with animal research, but we do interact with what we eat, and we don't think about that. And you don't need to become vegetarians. I won't either. But it's just something that is worth thinking about. I mean, there are other things, pets. I'm not sure if that's ethical or not. Leather. But the point is just that, that's just something that I took away from this debate. Is just that we should also think about things that we don't necessarily think about, like animal research, and we should extend that. That's what I just think. Thanks.
I'd like to thank Daniel for that speech. It is now time for us to move on to summary speeches. So, are you guys doing it together or one at a time? 5 minutes. Okay, so we will begin with proposition speeches. So, Helen, would you like to speak first?
Oh, yeah.
Spinning speeches as well. So we'll be spinning the speeches. So each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak, 2.5 minutes to speak each. No points of information can be taken during this time, and we appreciate you showing, obviously, respect to the speakers. So Helen, when you're ready.
Okay. So basically, I kind of wanted my speech to be like everything I didn't say in my main speech, but I think you found that really boring. So basically, like stuff like eating meat and wearing fur. Like, okay, I do both. Seriously, don't egg me for wearing fur, because all that stuff is exactly the same thing. Rabbits, we kill them for food. They've lived these amazing lives, running through and making burrows, and then we just and they're like, oh, I'm so happy now, I'm in heaven. And it's exactly the same thing with eating meat. But testing drugs on animals is completely different. Vivisection is a completely different kettle of fish. Bill, is that fun? I hope so. They're given these horrendous lives where, you see these mice, ears growing on their backs, they're dreadfully deformed, and they're always really ill. And it's just completely different than if you go and you buy a nice organic steak and the cows lived a good life in, Scotland. That's a completely different thing. So I think that's not so much an elephant in the room if you're ethical and you practice what you preach. And also, I liked this quote, pain only becomes suffering when you add consciousness. And I think that is really relevant. Our distinctions of consciousness make up how we distinguish what being a person is to being a human. Embryos are human, but we really don't care about killing them. Most of us don't. We probably all think, if we're in the situation, we'd want an abortion, right? But, that's true. Because they're not people. They don't have ways to judge pain. They don't have ways of consciousness. So they're not people. So being a human is different to being a person. And I think animals can be people. They can have rights like people can, because a fully developed animal could have more rights than an embryo, because it could have better pain sensors and a much higher level of consciousness. Apparently deer, if their mate's killed, then they go into social, they go away from all their friends, and they're really sad for ages, and they don't eat any food. So they can experience emotional suffering as well. So I just think the whole thing is crazy. Animals are people, they have feelings. Strange thing I said. They can feel pain, and also they can feel emotional suffering. So I think it's time we just start treating them like animals as well, as people as well, because that seems the only sane thing to do. Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Actually, Andres, we do all the proper than all the op speakers. Sorry. So I'd now like to call Dr. Menache to come up and conclude the case from his perspective. Here.
Adverse drug reactions, that's side effects to drugs that have been well tested on animals, are the 4th leading cause of death in the Western world, after heart attacks, stroke, and cancer. So the drugs that are supposed to be saving our lives are the 4th leading cause of death. So something, I think, is wrong with the system. Now, really, I don't have to lift a finger for the pharmaceutical industry to stop testing on animals, because they are doing it anyway. Okay, they've realized and they've discovered what is called personalized medicine. That is, we are all different. Okay, and how do we know we're all different? Well, look in the mirror. Or, you can drink a beer and your mate can drink, 14 beers and you both sort of are on the same level. So that's to do with liver function. Okay, but, personalized medicine, and the pharmaceutical industry recognizes this. You take 2 twins, identical twins, monozygotic twins, who at the age of 35 each discover they have breast cancer. They go to hospital, they have the tumor typed for the DNA, they have their humoral, the immune system tested, and lo and behold, there are tiny differences in the DNA between their 2 cancers. And as a result of those tiny differences in the DNA between the 2 cancers, the 2 identical twin sisters will get different chemotherapy. So if one identical sister cannot predict the type of cancer or the chemotherapy of her identical twin sister, how is a rat going to predict what's going to happen in a person? Okay, and a nice little example we had in the UK, one of the speakers mentioned the Northwick Park tragedy in 2006, I think. 6 healthy young white men took part in a clinical trial of a drug, an experimental drug that had been tested as safe, ladies and gentlemen, in monkeys at 500 times the dose that was given to these guys. So they received 1/500th of the dose that was safe in monkeys. And the six of them ended up in intensive care. One lost the ends of his fingers and toes. All 6 of them have signs of early cancer. Okay, so I ask you please, let's go with modern medicine, modern science, evidence-based medicine. Go with emotion rather than historical examples which we can revisit. If any of you have studied medical history, we can revisit insulin, polio, etc., and you will be surprised by what you will find. Thank you very much.
And now I would like to invite Dave to come and begin the summary for the opposition's case here.
I'm just going to talk about 3 things in wrapping up this debate. I'm going to talk about rabbits, I'm going to talk about children drowning, and then I'm going to talk about personalised medicine. In terms of rabbits, we just heard from the previous speaker that it's okay to kill for fur because the rabbits die immediately and they're up there in heaven. Isn't that lovely? Her entire speech before that was about how we should consider animals in the same vein as we consider humans. So if she follows through on this, she is perfectly okay with me killing my parents to make a nice human skin cloak, ladies and gentlemen. What we say is, if you're going to have a moral position, you have to at least be consistent. And to say that what is important is to prioritise looks, which ultimately is what fur is somewhat of an inconsistency within their case, ladies and gentlemen. So her case rests on the idea that emotional suffering is worse than death. And we're going to put a case on the other side of that, that bullying is probably not worse than being stabbed in the face. So second point, Alex gets up and tells us about, if we saw an adult and a child drowning, which one would we save? We would save the child. We then we should have asked, or I tried to ask Alex a question. And that question would have been, if Alex had saw a child and a dog drowning, which one would he have gone for? Or a dog and a mouse? Or a mouse and a fish? Which one would Alex have saved? And he actually had a real point in his speech as well. When he talks about, there are people with terminal illnesses who cannot ever consent into our contract, ladies and gentlemen. But what we think on our side of the house is, under the best case scenario, because we think humans are optimists, that there is a potential conclusion where they could consent into this. If we developed a cure, if we did do something in the perfect manner, then there could be a scenario in which this happened. We don't think that is true with rats and mice and fish. So last point we've heard is this idea of personalised medicine, ladies and gentlemen, and how the industry is already doing personalised medicine. If that is the case, then why do we need a ban? Because if they are already doing something that is working, then we don't need to ban it. What we say is the industry is doing this on top of everything else, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what's important, because it's providing us with more data in which to make more informed conclusions. With that, I beg you to oppose.
Thank you very much, David. I now call on Ms. Jarrett to conclude the case for the opposition and for the debate as a whole. I'll hear it.
Thank you. There's so many points I want to pick up on. I'm going to try and get through them in the time we've got. Personalised medicine. What actually happens in personalised medicine is that you go to the doctor, the oncologist takes a part of your cancer and puts it into a mouse and grows your cancer in a mouse and tests medicines against it. And that's how you find out which medicines work for you. So that's what personalised medicine actually is. You use mouse avatars. Northwick Park. What happened in Northwick Park? Absolutely right, that the monkeys showed evidence of a cytokine storm. But because the law says you have to use 2 mammals, the rats also showed a cytokine storm. And it was a human being who looked at that data and said, the rats showed the side effects that we don't like, the monkeys didn't, hey, let's go with it anyway. It was a human being's mistake, not the mistake of animal research. And when they got into doing the trial, what normally happens is you have 6 people, you give your compound to one person at a very low dose, and you watch them like a hawk for 24 hours. And if nothing happens to them, you give the next person a slightly larger dose, and you watch them for 24 hours and make sure they're all right. What happened for some unfathomable reason at Northwick Park is they gave all 6 subjects and the 2 controls, the placebo people, they gave them all the dose at the same time on day 1, so that they all 6 got very ill. So again, it wasn't the fault of animal research that those people got ill, it was the fault of human beings designing that trial. It's true that people die from adverse drug reactions. Every medicine has side effects, but we know what they are. We know, for instance, that aspirin causes stomach bleeding. We knew before Michael Jackson died that propofol can kill people if it's not used properly. That information is on the sheet of paper that comes along with every medicine. People die from adverse drug reactions not because a drug suddenly does something that we weren't expecting or we couldn't possibly predict. It's because people don't use those drugs properly. Doctors don't properly monitor the patients they're given those drugs to. They don't check that they're not taking other drugs at the same time that can interfere and cause that death. The last point I'd like to make, well, it's not quite the last point, the point about could we find, if we're given 7 years, could we find alternatives to all these animal research? We actually have a national centre in the UK, a national centre for the reduction, refinement, and replacement of animals in research, and they've been working for years. Nobody wants to use animals in research, but at the moment, it's the only thing we've got. And if you ban it, then I would say that the moral argument, which has been focused on very heavily, is that you are condemning hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to death.
I'd like to thank Wendy for that fine speech. And now it is time to count the votes. So can I have 2 volunteers from the committee, please? Emily and anyone else? Yeah, Kirsten's coming. Brilliant, thank you.
The lady with the green card against your list.
Okay, if you would like to vote in proposition of the motion, please raise your hand now. Okay, you can put your hands down. If you would like to vote in opposition of the motion, please raise your hand now. And if you would like to vote in abstention of the motion, please raise your hand now. Okay, so just while they're tallying up the votes, we have a couple of announcements. The first is I've been asked by the union to remind you that there is a general meeting for all members tomorrow at 5 p.m. in the Bloomsbury Theatre, where they'll be discussing a range of motions, including one about banning the song Bloodlines. I don't know if that would be quite interesting to some people. The other thing is next week our debate will be out of this room, finally, and will be in the Darwin B40 Lecture Theatre, which is a much bigger lecture theatre. And the motion we will be debating is "This House condemns the rise of the surveillance state in the United Kingdom." It's supposed to be going to be a very, very good debate. So please come and join us at 7 p.m. next week, on Monday. And the winner of the floor speech for this week is Nick.
Definitely alcohol.
Once again, I'd also like to say a big round of applause for our speakers who came here this evening to debate this topic, and thank you again to IDEA as well for helping us put on this debate. I thought it was a very, very interesting debate, and we hope to work with them in the future. So a big round of applause for the speakers. Once I've announced the vote, you can join us in a bar at TCR on Tottenham Court Road for post-debate social drinks, where you get 10% off at the bar if you mention you're part of the Debate Society. Don't forget to do that, because otherwise they won't give it to you. So now for the results. In third place, we have abstention with 12 votes. In second place, we have proposition with 15 votes. And in first place, we have opposition with a whopping 72 votes. Thank you very much for coming. We hope to see you next week. Okay.